Chapter 29 Another Attack. The next morning, when the sun was only just beginning to peek over the horizon, everyone was walking by alarms in the yell of a warlock. Usually if I got less than 8 hours of sleep, I would feel groggy and even a bit sick. But I didn't feel any of that as the explosions of magical spells rattled the hunker and woke me with a surge of adrenaline. 5M. These guys really need to fuck off. My nerves had died down as of late. A couple of sudden battles was enough to condition me, at least to the point where I wasn't in a constant state of fight or flight and hyper-awareness. That was the only reason some of my irritation could slip through as I climbed up into a turret and took aim. I immediately took count, finding about 13 warlocks posted not just in their own vehicles, but in the forest beyond the road. We had hit a roadblock of boulders that seemed to have been placed by the enemy warlocks, and now we were being pincered from both sides. And this time, the warlocks seemed to be hiding behind natural formations a bit more, not just standing out in the open where I could shoot them. It made this more difficult, and because the sun wasn't fully out yet, it was a bit harder to see into the tree line. But with my scope, things were made easier. Plus, the lights from their spells made them stand out like beacons, guiding my crosshair. Learning from prior battles, every warlock had a barrier up, and all of them were strengthened. They were specifically countering me, and not every warlock was casting spells. They seemed to be searching. In fact, several were looking toward my hunker. It was clear that I had caused them no small headache, and perhaps now they were trying to do something about it. I knew that the moment I took a shot, I would probably be bombarded with spells. And if I stepped outside to try and reposition, then I would be putting myself in danger. So they wanted to pin me down or eliminate me entirely. So I waited, thinking of what I could do to help with this battle while avoiding the focus fire of a dozen warlocks. And then, it hit me. Why did I have to only shoot the warlocks? Why not the knights? I would have to use more power, but if I switched guns as well, then killing several knights wouldn't be a problem. But going outside at all was still a problem, even if I had more freedom out there as opposed to in a stationary turret. Suddenly, I thought of my most glaring problem besides the sounds my guns made. It was the muzzle flash, which was incredibly obvious considering how much I stood out in general. If I got rid of that, the eye would be golden. The sound was so loud that it couldn't be precisely traced at the distance, so I could still operate despite it. That's when I had an idea. Kicking open the door of the hunker, I headed out and crouched down. And looking at the vehicle, I smiled. Suddenly, I crawled under the hunker itself, taking up position on the ground. From there, I could see up to everyone's waist, and it was easy to tell apart the Tavera knights from the enemy knights. After that, I aimed my rifle. The knights were always much closer than the warlocks, so I didn't have to stress my aim. And since I was now under this vehicle, I couldn't be hit by the warlocks. It was the perfect solution, so I aimed at an enemy knight with a smile, pulling the trigger. Asterisk bang asterisk. My bullet flew, and the knight that I shot buckled almost instantly. It gave a window of opportunity that the Tavera knight took immediate advantage of. With that, I let off round as fast as I could send them. I had to infuse a large amount of Psyche into each round just for the bullet to pierce through both armor and the tough bodies of the knights. But I quickly learned that my shots didn't have to be lethal for them to be effective. Suddenly getting hit by a bullet was a death sentence when you were also fighting against an enemy. It was a fatal distraction. So I even lightened up on the Psyche, focusing on my fire rate. And like that, the knights swept through their enemies. I didn't even have to kill the warlocks. With my assistance, the knights were able to pierce through all defenses and kill them for me. And I wasn't disturbed a single time, the enemy warlocks unable to deduce my position underneath the vehicle and behind the bodies of my fellow knights. And so the battle was won. After I crawled out, I could see everyone either getting treated or cleaning up. The captain also came and found me. "John. Excellent work." "Thank you, Captain." I smiled at his enthusiasm while we shook hands. "I saw exactly what you were doing, and I have to say that it was a genius tactic. In fact, because those stupid warlocks couldn't find you, They stood around hiding for half the battle. Just your presence alone is enough to disable them. And don't worry, even though you didn't kill anybody, you allowed us to kill those knights far faster than otherwise. I'll make sure you are paid for this battle. Just doing my duty, sir. I felt a bit shameless, saying that while grinning ear to ear. I had to admit, the huge paycheck this was turning out to be was a great motivator. However, this battle did indeed take a larger toll on me. Even though I was smiling, my head was screaming at me with a migraine after using so much Psyche. I felt like I would pass out any moment. So I kept our conversation short, and my next stop was the bunk where I fell right asleep. I couldn't even be bothered with breakfast, and I slept until well afternoon. Of course, I woke up to a starving stomach because of that. Thankfully I had been saved some food, not by Plex, but by some of the knights. I was thanked to no end while eating, probably because they had received my direct help. I was also guaranteed protection by the entire troop, so it was nice to know that everyone would be looking out for me. I just told them to make sure nobody attacked the hunker, because it had basically become my nest. If I lost that, then I would be in serious trouble. After that, evening dawned. After this, we would only have to make it through one more day. We would arrive the following evening, and so far, everything was going amazing. I had barely been hurt, and deaths were minimal. Injuries were prevalent, of course, but in normal cases most of those injured knights would be dead. I had saved no small amount of lives, and even though the last battle was more difficult than the other, I thought we could make it through the rest smoothly. Unfortunately, thinking that seemed to have conjured quite the opposite. Because when the moon appeared high in the sky, I was once again shot awake by all too familiar explosions. Thankfully I was rested, so I didn't have issues responding. But when I saw what we were up against, I could only curse under my breath. It looked like an army was waiting for us. Of course, we had an army of our own, but we were tired. Thinking back, I suppose the healers had it the worst. Well, they would need to step it up pretty soon. Because when attacks were launched, copious amounts of blood was shed. And the pressure I was put under skyrocketed as these enemies sought the head of the American who had been causing no small amount of trouble. Shit. Breakthrough. Get those fucking vehicles out of the way. Someone kill that warlock. Asterisk bang asterisk. Screams and gunshots made my ears ring. I suppose I was finally getting a small taste of what war was like on Earth, in this case. Thankfully, my air mask filtered what I breathed, so I didn't get the dense stench of blood and fire. It was my only solace during these battles. While fighting, I thought back a couple of times to what I had surmised at the beginning of the trip. My conclusion was that the final days of the trip would be the hardest since the enemy would be more desperate, throwing everything they had at us. I knew it was bound to come, especially since I was here keeping a vast majority of the convoy alive through every battle. But I underestimated just how difficult it was going to be. Well, I couldn't be blamed either. After all, I didn't expect that another mafia would come and try to bar our path. For most of the time, we had been facing the Clockwork Association. But on the last day, not only did we fight two back-to-back battles with those damned warlocks, but another mafia known as the Yin Guild suddenly appeared. They were supposedly a rival mafia that operated in the only black market in the city of Joffrun, our destination. And through the shouts and screams of battle with them, I learned that the Tavera family was attempting to encroach on their territory there. These mafias were more widespread than I initially thought. They hid slices of the black markets of several major cities. There were even entire villages that they controlled, these small settlements acting as places for their families to grow and produce more children who would later be inducted into the mafias. Of course, the capital was always where most of their power resided, so I wasn't missing much. But that was beside the point. There were naturally other mafias than the few I knew of, most being entirely localized to a single city. But that didn't mean they weren't powerful, and because they only had one nest, they didn't take kindly to others trying to intrude. Well, I knew there was more to the story, but that was all above my pay grade. I was only hired muscle who needed to help them reach their goals. Still, whatever the Tavera family was doing, it was enough to garner what seemed like the full force of their rivals. I wondered several times through the trip why our enemies didn't just send their full armies all at once. Surely it would be more effective, right? But this was wrong. Wearing down your enemy was effective, and striking when they were tired and when you were well prepared was the best. And, well, what they struck with when all was on the line seemed like their full army. It was like everything beforehand had only been a warm-up. Dozens of knights, many of which were terrifyingly powerful, and just as many warlocks. Not only that, but I finally got to experience a full-force battle between not a 36 but a 37 Turns out, the captain was an O37 knight, as well as the strongest person in this convoy. And after asking Plex, the highest power in the mafia usually stood around O39. For the Tavera family, that was their patriarch. So sending an O37 was big. After all, although the highest power was O39, that didn't mean they had many O38 The Tavera family may have two, at best four, and leaving the capital wasn't usually acceptable under any circumstances. So O37 was the best we had. Not that it was shabby. The captain was at the height of O37 as well as someone who had served for many years in the military. He was experienced and powerful. And this showed in the battle he fought. Honestly, the entire thing made me want to cower. Atrocious strength and speed was basically all there was to it. The captain could create craters in the ground with his feet, tear apart an entire vehicle with his hands, jump higher than trees could grow, and attack with speed that my eyes couldn't keep up with. I quite literally wouldn't last a second if I had to fight him. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he could dodge my bullets. Of course, displaying such feats of strength took a lot out of him. There was a reason he didn't show such strength earlier. And perhaps more shocking was the enemy he fought, who was likewise a knight, but not the type you'd think. He was a martial arts specialist, someone who fought with his body. He wasn't just a boxer who only fought with his fists either. His kicks could take out the trunk of a tree, his fists blowing holes in steel, his arms and abs able to deflect blades, and his footwork allowing him to reposition with blinding speed and impossible agility. His body just floated around while he attacked the captain, and their fights took them to all corners of the battlefield. In one moment, they'd be right in the center of a dozen men, and the next, they would be flying over the tree line and laying into each other on the other side of a hill. Their power wasn't something I could wrap my head around. It was disorienting seeing it at all, because it was stuff I had only seen in movies and the like. To actually see it in the flesh jostled my brain. It was like it didn't want to think that it was possible. But the damage they wrought was very real. I could only thank the captain for keeping that pugilist from tearing apart the hunker I was hiding inside. But, other than that distraction, I was wholly occupied with trying to stay alive. For the entire final day, we bounced from battle to battle. It was like there was a long line of people just waiting down the road and taking turns beating us up. And every time, we sustained more damage. It built up. More deaths, more injuries, and greater exhaustion. We were lucky our convoy was large, because any less people and we may not have been able to make it this far. And there was no opportunity to rest. At first it was manageable. I would get tired, restrain my use of Psyche, and gradually recover between battles. But as each hour passed, my mind's fatigue built bit by bit. First it was a constant headache, but then it turned into sharp pains that made me flinch with every surge of blood from my heart. Not only that, but I was attacked rather often. I had thought that I could just hide like I had, whether that was amidst the knights or around the hunker. But no matter where I went, it wouldn't be long before I was spotted by a knight or warlock and attacked. Running away from bloodthirsty knights was especially fun. My speed couldn't compare to theirs, so I was forced to move as fast as I could, delaying them with a shotgun, before getting an ally to save me. That scenario played out 4 times, and each time, I was pulled closer to death. The warlock spells that exploded around me weren't much better. No small amount of damage was blocked by my coat, but I still sustained several nasty bruises and a possible fracture in my left arm after getting slammed in the side by a large rock. Holding up a rifle became harder after that, and how I continued to manage was a miracle. But I did, even though I sometimes wanted to climb into the hunker and just hide for a while. But my willpower was strong. If there was one thing that I knew about myself, being one of my better qualities, was that I didn't buckle under pressure. Something about adversity like this spurred something within me, compelling me to step up and push back. It was a quality that only came out during sports, but here, it showed itself in full force when it really mattered. Despite the head-splitting migraines, despite the blood that dripped down my arm from a wound under my sleeve, despite the physical and mental exhaustion from trying to help while being hunted by knights and warlocks, I found it within me to continue surviving. And I never stopped shooting back. Ha! Ugh! I lay against one of the trucks while catching my breath, groans coming from underneath my mask. I felt some blood stream down the side of my head, a small wound from a small rock that came flying in from seemingly nowhere. What hurt the most though wasn't the wound it gave me, but the impact it had against my head that was already dealing with the nastiest headache of my life. Not only that, but my left arm throbbed with shooting pains every time my heart beat. It had been that way for more than a few hours now, and moving my fingers had gradually become more difficult. I concluded that my arm was broken, but unfortunately I couldn't get it treated in the middle of a battle. I barely even remember how I got that injury. In fact, so much as opening my eyes felt overwhelming. There was too much stimulation, the battle overwhelming my senses. But I couldn't close my eyes just in case I had to dodge another spell, nor could I just tune my hearing out and ignore what was going on. In the distance, I could see all the knights intertwined in fights. The tides were turning in our favor, the enemies of the Yin Guild falling beneath the sabers of the Tavera family. Pulling my gaze away, I looked toward the hunker not far away. From their turrets, the few warlocks that we brought were launching the occasional spell. Unlike me who could get hit by fire and water that easily slipped through the window, they had barriers that could block all that stuff, letting them fire freely. Looking at that tank on wheels, I felt the urge to go over and climb inside. I just wanted some rest, and surely the hunker's defenses could afford me that. But at the same time, there was still more I could do. I learned through much pain that maintaining a communion with a gun basically cost as much psyche as I passively recovered. This meant I could keep a gun in my hands and shoot unempowered bullets as much as I wanted. Of course, bullets that weren't infused with psyche weren't as powerful. Depending on the conditions, the best they could do was pierce a knight's armor and damage a warlock's barrier, yet do nothing to the body underneath. But in this battle, those two things were enough. So when I ran out of energy, that's what I resorted to, trying to afford my allies any advantage I could. After all, a bullet to the face, although not enough to kill a knight, was still a nasty distraction equal to a sucker punch. And if I was lucky enough to hit their eyeball or mouth, then even unempowered bullets became lethal. Unfortunately, my accuracy also lowered when I was exhausted, so those chances were low. Still, my bullets afforded our knights many opportunities, sometimes outright securing kills. So I couldn't stop. The only tough part was that, with every shot, I needed to move. Having my position locked down was a death sentence, so if I wasn't ready to run, then I didn't want to shoot. Even the air mask couldn't keep me going forever. In fact, I had eaten food on the battlefield during a morning battle, trying to keep my energy levels up. Taking a piss also wasn't out of the question, though doing so while watching out for spells was an interesting experience. Ugh. Damn it. I just need a breather. There's food there too, and I'm starving right now. I grunted before deciding to head over. I ducked low before slowly making my way, arriving at the beat-up door to head inside. But that's when I heard something in the distance. A scream, getting louder and heading my way. I looked up. Chapter 30 Gra. Asterisk boom asterisk. A body came flying through the air, hitting the side of the hunker like a cannonball. It was that Authority 7 pugilist from the Yin Guild. The captain wasn't able to kill him in the first battle, So he left before coming back again in a later battle for a rematch. He seemed to be getting his ass kicked once again. But, when he landed on the hunker, my neck tingled as I stared blankly. It folded under his body, the tank warping before flying off its wheels and into the air. I watched as the door, that was once right in front of me, flew a small distance away. The entire tank rolled a few times before gradually coming to a stop. And then, the pugilist clawed his way out of the metal. When he emerged, his eyes fell onto me, who was now standing out in the open, frozen. Seeing the gun in my hand, he smiled brightly. "You. Get over here and die, you fucking American." He snarled and threw his body toward me. My coat's abilities activated, but even in slow motion, his hand moved too fast for me to react to. I watched, feeling my soul leaving my body as if to try and avoid that monster in human skin. But, right as he was going to grab my head in his huge hand, I saw a line of silver arrive to the side. The pugilist's eyes went wide, and I saw blood bloom from his wrist. He had been relieved of his hand, pulling away with a scream. But that hand was still heading toward me, even if no longer attached to its owner. I tried to tilt out of the way, but those fingers still graced the right side of my head. Slice. Arg. It felt like I was slapped, heading to the floor as I felt a jolt of pain go through my head. At the same time, I felt a horrible sting where my right temple was. I already knew what happened. Fuck. What are those nails? I touched where I felt the wounds, and blood dripped down my fingers when I pulled away. The nails of that pugilist were as sharp as knives. Was there any part of a knight's body that couldn't kill me? Now, there were some lacerations across the side of my head. Not only that, but the stinging I felt only got worse as my headache became manageable. There was some foreign power that was making it hurt, probably the power of vigor that knights wielded. I've heard that at higher levels they can emit some. It was how Plex made himself invisible, and swordmasters could use it to release blades from their swords. Now, this power ate at my wounds, making it hurt much more than it should. And that was just a scratch from that man. Of course, he was in a much sorrier state. Ah. My hand. You son of a bitch. John. Let me handle this meathead. The captain dashed in and appeared before me, yelling out those words as if I was even able to do otherwise. With that, I ran away while the captain drove the pugilist back. With one less hand, there was no way he could win now. And that was basically the end of the battle. Not long later, our knights killed every last warlock and enemy fighter, not allowing anybody to retreat. By now, the sun was setting, so it was getting darker and cooler. Nobody even cheered when the battle was finished. They were just that exhausted. As for me, I overlooked the hunker that had served as my nest for the past several days. It was crumbled, now only a pile of metal. The two warlocks that had been inside those turrets were now piles of meat somewhere inside the debris. They had died instantly, not even to an intentional attack. I thought, if I had been any faster in boarding it in order to take a small rest and grab some food, I would have died without even knowing how. Everything would have been over, just like that. This new life of mine would be finished, and everything I'd built up so far would have been for nothing. And I would never have returned to Rayla, who was worried and waiting for me back at the capital. She would have been left alone, and I would have caused her grief that she may never have recovered from. It was a sickening feeling, one that terrified me more than anything. And for a moment, I thought that perhaps this kind of life wasn't for me, that I was better off just sticking to some ordinary job in the capital while leading a life away from all forms of hostility. The thought that I could so easily die like that, despite everything I did to avoid it, ate away at my mind. But then, I looked around at everyone else. Those who survived did so in part because of me. I played perhaps the largest part in securing the lives of those in this convoy than any other person here aside from the captain. Without me, they would have suffered far more casualties. It was why the captain had emphasized my importance after every single battle we fought. I was making a very real and noticeable difference. And soon enough, I would be putting this skill of mine to work not against people, but against beasts who threatened the entire human race of this world. In short, the sense of duty I felt overruled my fear. The thought of being able to turn the tides of any battle and save the lives of my allies infected my mind, turning fear into strength that brought out a deep sense of valor. After that, it was like the pain I felt turned into fuel for that fire. I couldn't say that this was inspiring a sense of purpose in me. These battles were between mafias, and I wasn't a part of one. I was hired muscle. I was doing this for money and to earn a reputation with figures of authority. Very little of this was something to be proud of, not that it was something to be ashamed of either. But through these battles, I knew I was growing. It would only make me better so that when the day came that I turned my guns against the true plague of this world, I could do so with even greater violence. And I would save more people. That way, perhaps I could avoid praying for the dead as much as I have been recently. Standing before the hunker, I bowed my head and thought of those two warlocks who I had almost joined in death, wishing that despite everything, they would find peace. We arrived at the city of Jaffrun. Our convoy was missing a hunker in the truck, along with most of the cargo that had been lost with the destruction of those two vehicles. But all things considered, the trip was a massive success. That pugilist had died to Plex after he almost killed me, and we either decimated or repelled every army that came our way. We had many casualties, at least a third of our forces dead and everyone being injured in some way. But we had made it. At the very least, we killed much more than we lost. And since the majority of the cargo had arrived in good condition, the job was a resounding success. Despite how conspicuous it was, all the trucks aside from the other hunker rolled directly into this city. I sat atop one of the trucks, getting a good look at this city. It wasn't as grand as the capital, that was for sure. But it had its own charm to it. I couldn't be impressed because the capital was basically the greatest center for humanity's prosperity in this world, but that didn't mean new things weren't cool to see. This city had one massive palace at its center, one that seemed to act as a hub for all kinds of business. In fact, there was one massive road that led straight to that palace in the city center from the gates we entered through. The road was straight and nearly 2 miles long. I could also see thousands of people and wagons occupying it. And as our battered vehicles drove down that road, we pulled plenty of heads. We were already conspicuous without looking as beat up as we did, so the scars of battle that littered the trucks only added to it. And then there was I who sat above everyone's head. You could see my torso wrapped in bandages from beneath my coat and my arm hanging in a sling. Not only that, but I occasionally took puffs from a cigar. Cough. I'll need to get used to this. After letting out a breath of smoke, I felt my lungs spasm before I muttered those words. This cigar wasn't some kind of drug despite what it looked like. I had actually been surprised by its existence when the captain came around and handed one to me. It was basically a revitalizer. The cigar was made from some special magical materials and infused with a bit of vigor. This made it almost medicinal in nature, capable of relieving the pain from wounds and helping the body recover with the fortifying power of vigor. My recovery pills were basically the same thing, except the cigar could last much longer and was more potent. They weren't cheap, but with the money I was about to receive alongside my savings, it wasn't much. I learned where to get more from the captain, who said it was actually a product created by Ryan and bought by the Tavera family, giving them sole rights to produce and sell it. The cigars were a popular product of theirs, especially among knights due to their infusion of vigor. Not only that, but these cigars were part of the reason for this trip. Apparently there was a vital ingredient that could only be found near the city, so securing the production of the cigars required them to invest in this place. This convoy contained the investment, though there was naturally much more to it than just that. Anyway, I decided I would buy some when I got back to the capital. While thinking of that, we eventually made it to Jaffrun's black market. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time nor interest in exploring this city. After the convoy linked with their headquarters, I went to go meet with the captain. However, upon arriving in the central area of their headquarters within this foreign black market, I saw that he was speaking to someone, and one that seemed rather noble. It was a woman, and just by looking at her I could sense deep power. It was definitely above Rayla, so she had to be at least a 39. She had ashen gray hair and wore dark robes accentuated with purple. Her face was sharp, yet there was an undeniable air of maturity around her. She almost looked familiar, but I wasn't in the mind to care much about that. Just watch yourself within my city. I don't want another war like that anytime soon. Cross a certain line, and I'll be forced to do something about it. At the very least, keep things discreet. Of course, Duchess. My patriarch also sends his good graces and wishes to hold a discussion with you. I hold his contact information, if you would like it. Very well. Agreeing, this Duchess exposed her aerial and touched it to the captains, exchanging information. Then, he gave a small bow. Thank you, Duchess. Sure. Be sure to. Who are you? Suddenly, the Duchess turned toward me, who had been lingering to the side. Surprised that she was bothering with me, I just nodded to her. My name is John, Duchess. You look injured, John. Summoner? Yes, ma'am. Young and a 33. Are you enrolled in the magisterium? I am. I see. She nodded, and suddenly, the captain chimed in. Duchess, John is an exceptionally powerful summoner that the Patriarch personally hired to help us defend the convoy. His potential is great. Well, Authority 3 can't do anything for me right now. Nonetheless, I will keep in contact. Please settle yourselves with haste. I don't enjoy my city being chaotic. Of course, Duchess. And John. She looked at me. Remember the name Teleria? Yes, ma'am. With that odd request, the captain and I exchanged goodbyes with her. She left the markets, and I finally got to speak with the captain who sighed. She runs this city, yet has a major hand in the operation of the black markets here. We cooperate with her directly. Anyway, how are your wounds, John? You were pretty battered after that last battle. I've never been afraid of scars. I smiled while remembering the aftermath of the battle. Because the healer was stretched to his limits, anybody with superficial wounds was forced to either wait or just heal normally. Despite that, I had actually been offered to get healed considering my contributions to the convoy, but I had turned it down. The healer checked me anyway though, and when he discovered my broken arm, he didn't let me refuse treatment. At the very least, he forced me to get my arm realigned, which I decided wasn't a bad idea. So the bones of my forearm were successfully repositioned, and through magic, secured in place and the fracture fused. After that my arm was wrapped with a splint and hung in a sling. Recovery pills and the cigar in my mouth helped all my other wounds take care of themselves. However, there was one wound that wasn't as easily dealt with. The wound from the pugilist's fingernails was infused with destructive vigor, creating 2 lacerations on the left side of my head. The lacerations went from my temple beside my eyebrow to the back of my head above my ear. It looked like I had been clawed by a monster, and that wasn't really far from the truth. And because of the vigor, the wounds weren't easily healed. In fact, until now I wasn't sure if all the vigor was actually gone. The lacerations had begun to heal, but they were taking much longer than my other wounds. Plex told me that it would leave a nasty scar, but it wasn't like my body didn't have plenty of those, so I didn't mind. After assuring Captain Dignoff that I was fine, he went on to once again praise my work. It was like he wanted to make sure I wouldn't leave without knowing how important I was to their success. I felt weird receiving all the compliments, especially since people died. It barely felt like a success right now. In the end though, he settled down and I told him about my intentions to leave. Of course, John. You earned both rest and your paycheck. Here, I wrote this up a couple hours ago. Suddenly, he took an envelope out of his coat pocket, handing it to me. It was sealed with wax and the symbol of the Tavera family, with some slight modifications. It was probably a personal seal. I took it with curiosity. When you get back to the capital, hand it to the Patriarch. He'll pay you out then. And don't worry about the kill counts. I think you'll more than appreciate the bonuses I've stipulated. All right. I nodded and stashed the envelope. I trusted the captain's word, so I didn't feel the need to verify anything. And if I was being honest, I would be fine accepting nothing more than the base pay without the kill count bonus. It was odd how going through hardship made you more of a generous person, not that I still wasn't raking in coin from this job anyway. Oh, and here. For your travels. Reaching into his coat once more, Captain Ignov pulled out another item. I recognized it rather quickly. It was a metal cigar case. It looked brand new. Its face is made with deep gold and engraved with dark red designs. The red designs were of roses and leaves, and the colors were so vibrant that it seemed like an actual painting. This is one of our signature cigar cases, owned by many high-profile elites within the kingdom since it's the best of its kind on the market, along with the best looking. It's designed to preserve the magical potency of those cigars. Go ahead and use it. I was silent as I pressed a latch on the side of the case, popping it open. On one side of the case, there were 5 loops to hold more cigars, 3 of which were filled. And on the other side there was a fancy lighter constructed from an entire white crystal as well as a cigar cutter. After closing it, I looked back toward the captain. Is it all right for me to have this? How much of these? Well, you can't really buy them, otherwise they wouldn't be very valuable. Besides, I don't think the patriarch would mind. We give them to friends of the family and circulate them among elites and royalty. And you, John, are a friend of the family. If not, you wouldn't have been called to help us on this trip. Oh. Well, I guess I can only give my thanks. It was feeling like an honor to receive this cigar case, as odd as that was. I wasn't sure how to respond except with a thank you. Captain Ignov smiled and smacked my shoulder. You're a good one, kid. Better than Plex, I reckon. I heard that. Suddenly, Plex appeared beside us, causing the captain to click his tongue. Sneaky as always. By the way, I could have handled that brute from Yin by myself. Yes, but then I wouldn't be getting paid for his head. And that's why John here is better. Go on and get out of here. The rails leave in about 3 hours, so you better head over and get a ticket. With that, Plex and I said our goodbyes, leaving behind the captain who was now assigned to this city. I also made sure to get the man's contact info for my aerial. Networking was always important. After that, we went to the junction for the rails, or trains as I knew them. These rails didn't leave very often because there weren't many of them, but we didn't have to wait for long before snagging a ticket and boarding. Just like that, I completed my job and was on my way home. Chapter 31. The rail took no more than 6 hours to bring Plex and I back to the capital. That meant it could cover a day's worth of travel in an hour. The job had taken just about a week, given all the battles. And the only reason it didn't take longer was because of my input. Considering that this world was using magic instead of technology, I wasn't sure if I should be impressed by the speed of the rail or if that much should be expected. Either way, when we pulled into the capital's junction, I sent out a message to someone who would surely be expecting it. And by the time I had walked out onto the city streets, Rayla had already arrived. She found me with a bright smile. John. Hi Rayla. I chuckled as she ran over, feeling a bit buttery inside. She almost jumped toward me, wrapping me up in a tight hug. Unfortunately it hurt though, causing me to grunt as she aggravated some wounds. Oh. I'm sorry. Are you hurt? No, it's fine. I just need a bit more time to recover. We should get you to the hospital. It's fine. No, you still need to get back to the magisterium. You can't have any lingering wounds when you go on your next trip, so let's go. Not giving any room for refusal, Rayla linked with my arm and pulled me along to the Founders Market. I just acquiesced, partly because she was right and partly because I needed to see the patriarch anyway. Soon enough, we arrived at the hospital we always went to while doing jobs. Since my face and name were rather famous here, I was quickly given service. One of the healers sent mana throughout my body, fixing any internal wounds while pushing my natural recovery into overdrive. I felt my body turn hot, as if I was working out. That process lasted for several minutes before my pain faded away and the healer finished. Then, I sat up, feeling hungry and thirsty but relieved. After paying, we headed out and grabbed some food. Rayla knew what healing could do to the body, so she had already picked out a fast food place. It was there though that she suddenly asked a question after not speaking for a while. "Have you ever thought of using some crowns?" "What are those?" I asked back at the mention of an unfamiliar term, prompting her to explain. "Crowns are enhancements for the body. Because warlocks and summoners can't strengthen their bodies like knights can, there was one major advancement made many years ago by a warlock alchemist from the church who went insane. She called them crowns, and these crowns could utilize the power of the scourge and white crystals to strengthen the human body in special ways similar to knights." "That sounds dangerous." I nodded while thinking of the implications of such a technology. A woman had to experiment using materials from scourge beasts and infusing them into her body while trying to squeeze out enhancements. Crystals from the scourge were poisonous normally, so I didn't even want to know what putting those materials inside your body would do. And Rayla nodded in confirmation. "It is dangerous, or was. In short, that warlock named Madame Tracy ended up deliberately killing herself after going insane and gave her body for her research. The church utilized her sacrifice and ended up perfecting the technology to some extent. It's been many years since then, and while getting your hands on a crown is still expensive, it's not nearly to the degree of decades ago. For higher-level warlocks and summoners, these crowns are extremely valuable enhancements to their strength that can eliminate some weaknesses." "Millimeters," I hummed while munching down on some food. These crowns really did seem valuable, but I didn't know enough about them to make a decision right now. I responded while finishing my meal. "I'll have to ask Maxwell about them, then." "You should. I've known many warlocks in the military who have used them without side effects, and there are many that go beyond simply making your muscles stronger. I've heard of one that can enhance your vision several times over, something you might like." "That does sound interesting." I smiled while imagining what it would be like to have such powerful eyes. I wouldn't even need scopes for my rifles. Taking note of all this information, Rayla and I made our way over to the Tavera territories, arriving before their headquarters. I was welcomed in, and Rayla followed me to the office of the Patriarch. "Ah, John. Very good to see you in good health. Congratulations on the successful trip, and thank you for your good work. I've received a report from Ignov." The Patriarch stood, the two of us shaking hands before taking a seat. I smiled, glad he was aware of everything. "Yes, Patriarch. Although we lost some men and cargo, I would say it went rather well." "Indeed. I'm aware that your contributions were a major factor in our success. I don't have all the details since Ignov is still busy over there, but his praises spoke enough. I believe you have a letter for me?" "Millimeters." I took out the wax-sealed letter and handed it to the Patriarch, who broke it open and read through the single page within. He took a minute, nodding a few times, before setting it down with a thoughtful smile. "I see. Well, I suppose it's the only number I need. Tell me, John, what was your kill count on this trip? Even a rough estimation is fine." "I believe the count was around 35. So if all the enemies you killed had an average strength around tier 3 or 4, then you would be receiving about 175 gold bullion for your kills. Along with the initial 85 and not even factoring in certain higher value kills, that makes at least 260 gold bullion for the job. With other factors, it's actually more like 280 to 300. However, Ignov mentioned nothing about kill counts. Instead, he told me what to pay you directly." I was silent as the Patriarch made some rough calculations. And when he finished, he suddenly reached into a drawer, pulling out a wooden box. He slid it toward me before sitting back and waving. "Your payment for the job, John Cooper." I was curious as I slowly reached over and popped the latch of the box. Even Rayla couldn't help but lean forward. And opening the box, I saw 6 columns of glistening gold coin. With my quick mind enhanced by Psyche, I counted 100 coins in each column. That made 600 gold bullion, or 600,000 coin. All for 1 week of work. but I didn't immediately take it. While the sight made me salivate, I was wondering why I was being paid double of what I deserved based on my kill counts. The patriarch explained as if reading my mind. In the report and letter, I was told that you did a fantastic job in killing enemy warlocks, of which constituted most of your kills. However, establishing that kind of superiority did more than just kill others. You also saved my men. I had been expecting to lose at least half of that convoy since we've been stretched thin lately. But you, John, managed to cut those potential losses in half. This payment is for the lives you saved alongside the enemies you killed, and believe me, I value keeping Tavera lives more than delivering death to our enemies. So go ahead and dump that coin into your card. You aren't allowed to leave until you do. He spoke with a smile, making me scratch my head in embarrassment. It felt weird being praised like this, even if I also enjoyed it. So while trying to look as humble as one could doing such a thing, I grabbed the rows of coin and tossed them into my bank card. Just like that, my savings had doubled to reach over 1 million coin, or 1,000 gold bullion. Even then, it was still hard to believe that my services were worth so much. Though, that feeling conflicted with the undying pride I had in my guns. For now at least, I remained humble. Later I would have the time to sing my own praises about how totally awesome American violence was. Oh, some extra cigars for you as well. Don't worry, the ones that normal humans can use are rather cheap, so just think of it as an extra bonus. The patriarch also handed me a small box of cigars, ones identical to those I had received from Captain Dignov. There were 30 inside the box, which I stashed into my spatial bracelet. With that, my business concluded with the patriarch. Just in case though, I notified him that I would soon be gone for a month on a hunting trip with the magisterium. After all, I wouldn't be able to take jobs for that duration. He assured me that was okay and gave his apologies for taking me away from school in the first place. After that, Rayla and I left. It was currently evening, so Rayla would have to go to work soon. But until then, we decided to spend some time together at her place, her wanting me to recount my time on that trip. So I did so until she left, after which I headed back to my dorm at the Magic College. "Where the hell have you been?" I seem to recall telling you that I would be gone for a bit. I responded while flinching away from the harsh voice of the puppet master. I knew why he was unhappy. I missed over a week of training, and in only 6 more days, I would be heading out to finally fight the Scourge alongside the military. Not that I hadn't gotten any training in either. I would argue that fighting humans was much more difficult than fighting mindless beasts in every way. If I could preserve my life against an organized assault spanning several days, then I could survive against some monsters. Mr. Puppet scoffed at my answer though. "You told me you would be gone, but not for a week. You barely have any experience fighting my puppets, and you want to march onto a battlefield and fight scourge beasts? Do you not value your life? Hey, I at least wasn't idle. Combat experience is combat experience, regardless of the enemy." "Just how many people did you kill on this trip of yours?" "A few dozen. HMPH. Even with the threat of extinction, humanity can't seem to put aside its own petty desires and squabbles. What a waste of lives." Mr. Puppet let out a deep sigh laced with a hint of contempt. He wasn't disagreeing with what I did specifically, but the entire situation as a whole. And I could understand. You'd think with the vast enemy that was the Scourge at their doorstep that humanity would come together under the threat of mutual extinction and devote everything they had to stopping it. But instead, there was infighting that resulted in the loss of countless lives. People that could put their efforts toward killing another beast were being wasted. But the kingdom of Dragon Tongue had been around for a long time, and that existential threat was no longer so bad. They had defended for so long and were numb to the constant shadow of their enemies until they were able to ignore it. Only if they were on their last legs would they finally wake back up enough to feel themselves being drowned and overwhelmed. Then again, that naivety could only be afforded by the sacrifice of those who stood at the forefront. After feeling a bit somber myself, Mr. Puppet snapped me out of it. "Whatever. This week you're going to be doing nothing but training. I'll set up scenarios every day for you and your teams. I suggest you learn everything you can and get used to these types of battles, because you'll be facing it for real soon enough. Anyway, go ahead and get out there now. Regular hunting today, but I'll modify things specially for you. Survive for the next 2 hours and I'll consider today a good day. I hummed and walked out, entering the portal after throwing on the protective band. Then, I was dropped into a mountainous region. There were hills, sheer cliffs, ravines, and mountains all around me. And not long after appearing, I heard a somewhat distant roar. It seemed I would be the prey instead today. So with a sigh, I picked my weapon, equipped my air mask, and started running. Ha! Ha! With labored breaths, I made it to the top of a small mountain. Then, I suddenly turned around, the barrel of my shotgun humming a tune as it followed. A beast screamed from behind. Scree. Boom asterisk. The empowered slug took off its head, the body falling down the steep trail and crashing into several other corpses. After that, I posted up behind a large boulder, taking out my rifle and getting ready. A few hundred meters away, I could see around a dozen puppets running their way toward me. For the entire time in this barren mountain range, I had been constantly hunted down by small groups of beasts that the puppet master no doubt controlled to attack me. I used the land to my advantage since I couldn't hide, constantly battling and running. There was no chance to sit still, because relaxing meant that I wasn't killing an enemy that was coming toward me. Bang asterisk. The scope rifle in my hands accurately felt a monster below. At the same time, I saw a lance of magic appear beside another beast. I didn't so much as flinch when the lance flew and hit the boulder I was on top of. These beasts needed to be much more accurate if they wanted to hit me behind such advantageous cover. Bang asterisk. I took out the monster that failed to distract me, moving on to the others and letting off more rounds. By the time they were about to reach me, there were only 3 left. So I put away the rifle and took out a revolver in my right hand and a sawed-off shotgun in my left. I fired the revolver, letting off all 6 rounds in the cylinder. With those rounds, only 1 monster died, the bullets not packing a heavy punch and not carrying much of my psyche. Now there was 2 left, and when the first one dove at me, I fired the shotgun. Boom asterisk. It blew its head off, but there was still another. I barely aimed again before firing. Boom asterisk. Another shell, but this time, I only took off an arm. The monster still lunged toward me. It was big and shaped like an alligator with large claws and a huge mouth. Its tail thrashed violently while it screamed in pain, all the while it was still trying to kill me. Just about every puppet I had killed wouldn't stop trying to kill me unless I put it down. No injury would stop it, not even a blown-off limb. That hit caught me by surprise twice, and those 2 incidents were valuable experiences that taught me the difference between humans and these beasts. So as I saw the claw of this beastly alligator coming at me, I thought of a few ways to combat it. 2 of my guns were empty, and communing with another gun didn't happen instantly. My next move wouldn't consist of a weapon. But I was a quick thinker, even before Psyche enhanced my mental faculties so much. And using that quick brain of mine, I suddenly swung my shotgun. Smack. The alligator's body was bashed to the side, the claw missing my body. Then, I kept swinging the heavy shotgun, beating its head into a pulp. Fuck off, you damn lizard. Scree asterisk. It let out another loud sound before recovering and trying to attack again. But right as it did, in my hand appeared a lever-action rifle, which I placed against the alligator's head. Bang asterisk. Its body collapsed as a new hole was created next to its eye socket. With that, I sighed and took a seat on the nearby boulder, finally being able to feel the cool breeze across my sweaty face. I looked around into the distance. Because I was close to the top of a mountain, I could see the wider world. But that wider world was cut off by some kind of invisible wall, no doubt the bounds of this constructed place. I really wondered what kind of power allowed someone to just create miniature worlds like this one on a whim. Even the puppets were impressive because they seemed just like regular beasts. It could obviously only be done by magic, but to think that any level of magic could allow someone to do this was absurd. How were you supposed to kill someone like that? Was it possible, even with my guns, to ever pose a threat to that kind of existence? It seemed impossible, even more so to think I could ever reach that height myself. During my time in this world, I had never truly entertained the idea of reaching the highest pinnacle of power. It simply seemed too far away. For someone like me who came from another magicless world, I didn't believe myself to be a part of that same system, so I didn't even think it would be possible. I would continue to build my power so long as I could. How far that would lead, I didn't know. I'm sure I could do great things even if I only reached Authority 8 like Rayla. But for now, the notion of reaching something like Authority 12 was completely beyond me. It didn't even seem like a cool thought. It was just overwhelming, like thinking of every problem I would ever have to face throughout this life and packaging it all into a single box. In fact, I'm sure it entailed nothing less. Ambition was good, but only up to a certain point. I could feel that as I thought about these things. And soon enough, my time on this hunting ground was finished. I was teleported out, appearing alongside several others who had also been hunting like me. Chapter 32, John. I knew I heard you in there. Tana spotted me not long after appearing. She, along with the others I had once teamed with, came to greet me. Umara and Hoibert smiled as we shook hands. Hey, where have you been all week? You just disappeared. I was on a business trip. Is that what gave you the new scar on your head? Umara moved to my side and traced the wound on my temple. Even Hoibert moved over curiously to see it. I shrugged. It was a bit eventful. Apparently. Listen up. Suddenly, we were interrupted by the puppet master. Everyone turned, seeing him standing at the door to his monitor room. For the next several days, I will be running scenarios for all of you. Your trip is coming up at the end of the week, and I intend to prepare you all. These scenarios will all be difficult, and very few of you will be able to get perfect scores. I will also be shuffling the teams twice, so you will need to learn to cooperate with others you don't know. This means you need to prepare yourselves for several days of exhaustion and pain. Remember that recovery is also a part of battle, so I won't be hearing any excuses. And none of you are allowed to skip. Well, isn't that great? Everyone groaned, already feeling the oncoming torture. After that, we were let go. I walked with my little group back to the dorms. Hey John, what exactly do you do? Beyond the magisterium, I mean. Hoibert suddenly asked. When I looked at him, I could see him eyeing my coat. Well, everyone eyed my coat at some point. It was subtle, but if you got a decent look at it, it wasn't hard to tell that it was expensive. I smiled a bit sheepishly. I'm just a delivery man. Delivery? What do you deliver? Oh, you know, just whatever packages need to be moved. People call the company I work for and request deliveries between them and a client. I'm responsible for picking up those packages and making sure they get to the customer. Wow. Sounds simple enough. Then, how much does delivery work pay? It depends on the job honestly. Regardless, I just worked and saved as much money as I could before entering this place. I don't have many things that I can call my own, but the few things I do are valuable enough. I see. Hoibert nodded, as did the two girls. My words were vague, but it wasn't like they would guess that I worked in the black market. But then, Umara tilted her head. So that business trip was a delivery, right? So what exactly gave you that scar? A package fell on me, had some metal items in it. I barely dodged, but it still caught the side of my head. But you got it healed, no? It's a new but healed scar. And usually when you get healed, scarring doesn't occur, especially not that badly. I only got it partially healed, enough to stop the bleeding and seal it. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough money to get it completely healed and erased. I made something up on the fly, interrupting Umara's train of thought. It seemed she was rather sharp, or just enjoyed digging into other people's business. Thankfully she dropped it with a shrug. It wasn't like I was adamant about keeping my line of work a secret, but it also wasn't something I intended to broadcast either. The fewer people who knew about who I was, the better. After all, I had a not-so-small target on my back. I had killed no small amount of people and pissed off far more. Despite being neutral, I wouldn't be surprised if the Clockwork Association put a bounty on my head. It seemed Tana and Hoibert were still a bit suspicious though, which I couldn't do much about. Not long later, we arrived at the dorms. Saying our goodbyes, all of us retired for the night. The following days were filled with constant stress. The puppet master was serious about getting us ready. Every day, he had a new scenario which involved different monsters and different maps. From dark forests to bright white deserts, he threw us into every situation imaginable. One scenario required us to hunt down a particular monster hidden within the aforementioned dark forest. Another required us to hold off against hordes of monsters within an established base. We even had to escort a person from one base to another, the person being a puppet who wasn't allowed to be hurt during the transport. All of the scenarios had us on our toes and stressed our wits. They all also lasted between 4 and 8 hours. Needless to say, the following mornings were all dreadful. I had no time to cultivate my authority or practice controlling my aura. My main focus was just surviving each day and trying to do well. Another downside was how I was slotted with a different team every single scenario. I saw no person twice. This required me to get to know a couple dozen elites and operate around their skill sets. Luckily, because the different types of magi only fell into 3 categories, it got easy to guess what each person could do as a baseline. For example, I could generally predict how capable a warlock was and how they fought. I knew that knights were either defensive or offensive, not having much utility at all, and were almost always close combat fighters. As for summoners, I only saw one of those. And he was an interesting fellow. We got along well. That summoner was a hot summoner, as opposed to cold, who could summon ethereal beasts to his side. It was the textbook example of a normal summoner. He was able to summon 3 beasts, one of which was a serpent while the other 2 were a bear and tiger. He made a contract with those spirits at the beginning of the scenario, and they stayed with him throughout the entire thing. But, unlike me who actively communes with my spirits, he had to give them payment up front. This meant that his psycho was massively drained before anything even began, and sending the spirits back early would waste some of the psycho he spent. It was a generally strict system without nearly the same flexibility mine had. Of course, because he was also an Authority 5, his spirits were powerful. They could go toe-to-toe with several of the puppets we fought, holding the line just as well as a knight. Only, when one of his spirits was killed, he suffered backlash. That was yet another downside of normal summoning. Either way, I got a perfect score for 3 out of 5 scenarios. It was rather exciting, and even the puppet master was impressed, though he tried his best not to show it. Like that, the end of the week came. Only the 4th years were to leave for their trip at this time. Everyone else had another month or so before they would go. So a few days before our departure, the entire 4th year dorm was flooded with letters regarding the trip. And it were the details. At the end of the week, we were to take a rail out of the capital and head to the frontier military installation known as Calatrop Base. We would be accompanied by several 4th year instructors, one of which was the puppet master. Once there, we would be given assignments in groups. And although we were being treated with a bit of special courtesy, it was generally expected that we learn to live in the military environment as normal soldiers. This meant we would have tight bunks and need to know certain protocols and rules. Of course, we were also granted a bit of leniency. Not only had we students not gone through basic training, but we were also talented and powerful individuals. Everyone in the 4th year of the magisterium was young yet much more capable than the rest. If you couldn't hit certain benchmarks, then you would leave early for basic training, continuing your magical advancement within the walls of a base. If you made it to the 4th year, you were almost guaranteed to reach authority at some point in your life. So although it was naive thinking, To expect the fourth-year students to be able to hold their own wasn't unfounded, even in a military environment. They had some weight to throw around, especially when most of those in the general population had no magical power to speak of. That held true even in the military. I was curious to see how things were run, if I was being honest. I wasn't completely unfamiliar with the military on Earth, and I knew that medieval armies lacked organized training and systems compared to modern militaries. I wondered if that were true here, though I doubted it considering humanity was constantly under attack by the Scourge. They couldn't lack military development, otherwise they would have fallen long ago. So I looked forward to it all. More than that, I looked forward to truly facing the Scourge for the first time. Thankfully, the puppet master gave us the day before our departure off. I didn't even go to classes the day, just spending my time taking care of business. I had a few people to talk to, the first being my mentor. Standing outside the Black Spider Hotel, I saw as carriages came and went, each of them dropping off rich or influential figures. This place was always full of those individuals. You couldn't come to this place otherwise. Of course, there were lucky exceptions like myself. But the vast majority of people would never so much as hear about this place, let alone knew what existed behind the luxurious exterior. I entered after some men in suits and robes. At the desk, I saw the keymaster checking them in and handing them bronze keys. Afterward, they all disappeared into the elevators. I walked over once he was free, smiling. "Good day, keymaster. Having fun? John. A pleasure to see you here. And I always have fun checking in esteemed political guests. Is that so?" I leaned on the desk, looking to where those political figures disappeared. Who were they? 2 marquises and 3 powerful merchants. They've come here to discuss business, as many of such stature do. This place not only acts as a hotel, but a grounds for diplomacy and exchange. You could say it's a neutral territory guaranteed by the hotel itself. By the hotel? Not the Polaris family? Indeed. The Black Spider Hotel is its own entity. The Polaris family operates behind the face of the Black Spider and within its market. Wow. I guess that makes the hotel powerful. I mumbled while visualizing everything in my head. How powerful did you have to have the Polaris family, a known behemoth in the black markets above even the Tavera family in Apokrine's trenches, hide behind your authority? It implied that this Black Spider was much more than just the name of the market, an entity all to itself, and one that held more power than the other factions. All of which was shocking, because I had never heard anything about this before. I thought I knew about more than the average, even within the black markets. After all, I had basically uninhibited access to both markets and worked with a few large organizations within each. This was all afforded to me by Plex, but my point still stood. And sitting even deeper in the darkness of the black markets was an invisible monster I had never even known about until the Keymaster gave me the subtle glimpse. It took a bit of self-control on my part to not take a look at the Keymaster, trying to hide the complex thoughts in my head. I was also questioning the identity of this man behind the desk. Unassuming and all was treating everyone with professional courtesy, he seemed like nothing more than his station, a simple clerk. But he was always here. Always. I could enter this lobby at any hour of the day and he would be here. In fact, his absence was rarer than otherwise. According to Plex, if he wasn't there, then the entire black market would be on high alert. Just how powerful was the Keymaster? Shit, my aura. I suddenly snapped out of it. I forgot that I couldn't conceal everything about my state of mind. My aura was acting out of my control. With a deep breath, I forced myself to forget about everything, turning back to that unassuming clerk. "Well, Keymaster, don't work too hard. You as well, John. I hear you're about to leave for your hunting trip. Calatrop Base, correct?" Yay. I was half surprised, and half expectant to hear him say that. It was another peculiar thing about the Keymaster. He seemed to know everything. He knew when I was going to meet Maxwell for the first time. Back then, I assumed it was because this hotel was under the jurisdiction of the Polaris family, and by extension, the keymaster knew about some of the affairs within it. If he was notified to look out for my arrival, then it was expected. But if this hotel was its own separate entity, then the keymaster wasn't affiliated with the Polaris family. He shouldn't have known. And maybe I was looking too far into it, but I didn't think he should know about my destination. But I quickly pushed all that to the back of my mind. I'm planning on talking to Maxwell about some things before I go. Understandable. Then I won't take any more of your time. Please go ahead. An elevator is waiting for you. When you come back, however, I have something to speak to you about. Oh, well, all right. Later then. With a bit of awkwardness in my step, I walked past the desk and entered the elevator. Like that, I entered the market where I found my way to Polaris headquarters. I entered Maxwell's study with a sigh. Hey, Maxwell. Oh, hello John. I was expecting your arrival. He set down a book, looking at me through a magic monocle. I see the puppet master has been getting you ready. Good. Yay, he's really wearing us to the bone. I just wanted to ask if there was anything I should prepare. Well, not as if you can't bring most of what you own with you. Just make sure you have the white crystal and the cultivation formations. I expect you to make good progress while you're gone. Really? It feels like I'm going to get nothing done. I scratched my head. The formations for a 34 were incredibly complex, and understanding them was proving to be several times more difficult than that for a 33. It felt like I would need at least several months. I didn't believe I could finish before the end of the year, at least, which was in 3 more months. But Maxwell thought otherwise. A 34 is a watershed. Your mind will go through great changes in the process of advancing. Unlike the previous authorities, which merely required you to accumulate before breaking through barriers, you will change the very essence of your psyche and go through an evolution. This is why the formation is far more complex, because it will guide you through the process of that evolution. So, think of it not as one large array for simply gathering power, but a guide for circulating your power step by step. All right. I recalled the formation as he spoke, realizing that I should take his advice and change the way I was approaching comprehending the formation. After that, he leaned back into his seat. By the end of the month, I expect you to have comprehended the entire formation. After that, it will probably take you around 4 months to advance. Oh. Well, I guess that's not too bad. I scratched my chin. It was a bit shorter of an estimate than I expected, but reasonable. The hard part though was comprehending the formation. It seemed I had my work cut out for me. This trip would be difficult in more ways than one. Tobe continued,